this live webinar, and also in the future, those of you who are watching this on a replay. So hello to all of you out there in the universe. Thank you for joining us today at YWCA Greater Green Bay and joining us in our mission to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. We are so excited today to be able to present the work that our YWCA staff and the Brown County Health Department staff has been working on together around identifying the racial disparities within health and the impacts on health of racial disparities and racism particularly. So thank you all so much for joining us. Here at YW, we do a number of things around racism and racial disparities and educating about racism. And I invite you to join us to our Stand Against Racism series, which is a monthly webinar series. And all of those are recorded and available on our website for watching now as well, all of our past ones. So you can find them on our website at ywcagreenbay.org. So again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining us. And I will pass this over to Renita for some more introductions.
Indeed. We are so excited to be here. This is the combination of a lot of work, you know, from the interviews for our interns and our partnership with University of Wisconsin Green Bay to our application with the Greater Green Bay Community Foundation and their Basic Needs Grant gift, and just developing a robust, strong, and exciting relationship with the Brown County Health Department. A lot of conversations with other community partners. It's always wonderful to kind of close your eyes and look back and say, uh-oh, we made it, we've done it. And so we're excited to be offering you all a report out that gives a really broad overview of what the community members, in particular community members from different affinity groups, said their experience was encountering racism as a endeavor to secure health care. And so you all will see a lot of the players who worked behind the scenes, doing the interviews, corralling the participants, taking copious notes so that we all were on the same page, and then bringing things together so that the community could have an understanding of the work that's ahead of us. And so I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you. Thank you to our partners, in particular. Thank you to Brown County Health Department and all of the behind the scenes work of Katrina and Andrea, and then of course Melissa here down at Ground Zero, who really kept all the balls in the air. Just a really fantastic team of people to work with. And so in 2018, the Wisconsin Public Health Association declared racism a public health crisis in Wisconsin. And the YWCA and the Brown County Health Department partnered to explore racism's impact on health and well-being in our community. And so community members participated in focus group sessions, and there was a decision made to make it affinity focus group sessions, because what we knew from the Brown County Life course study was that we were missing some voices. And so the affinity group focus groups gave a chance for all of those voices that people were concerned were not being presented to kind of be front and center. And it was marvelous just to see, one, the experiences of them, the similarities, some of the very different and the standout things that were happening to them. And then kind of for us, get information about what we could do next to kind of offset that and remediate those health disparities and those social determinants of health. Well, so what are social determinants of health? This is probably the usual suspects because you are folks that are passionate about this work and you're familiar with it. But for those of you all that's a little bit new to, simply social determinants of health are all of the things that we do where we live, where we play, where we get the things that make us feel whole and complete that have an impact on our health. So that might be the education that we have. That might be the neighborhoods that we live in. It might be the workplaces. It may be our access to health insurance, or whether we feel profiled by the police department. It's all of the things that have an impact on us day to day. At the end of the day, when we reflect on our day and we say it was a thumbs up or it was a thumbs down. Next slide. And so There was a need for a planning grant because the information that we recognize came to bear in those social determinants of health were so big that we said we have to eat this elephant one bite at a time. And so the basic needs planning grant of the Greater Green Bay Community Foundation, thank you so much for your continued partnership in changing the story of Green Bay in a positive way, Greater Green Bay Community Foundation. But we were allowed or given the opportunity to secure basic needs planning grant with the Greater Green Bay Community Foundation and partner with the YWCA Brown County Health Department. And what I want to highlight about that is that many of the deals or the end products that we see happen because we have relationships with people in the community. We have other meetings, and on an aside, we say, hey, this thing is going on at the YWCA. And as a result of that, these beautiful things happen. And the work that led to this grant happened with some of the partnerships and relationships of a former staff person, Christina Shelton, who is now a state representative, and some of the people that she knows and is friendly with in a number of places in the community. And as a result of that, some of our community partners like Big Brothers, Big Sisters of North Wisconsin, and a committee that I sat in with several of the CEO, which was another grant sponsored by the Greater Green Bay Community Foundation. I developed relationships there where I felt comfortable reaching out and saying, would you be a part of the team that is going to inform the questions for a survey that we'd like to hand out to get some information on how people are experiencing racism in Green Bay. And from that, of course, and with that, we have a relationship, a very strong relationship with Casa Alba Melody and all the great work that they're doing in the community. But those relationships made it really easy for me to reach out and say, hey, do you mind? Could you give a little bit more of your time and sit on a committee and help us so that we know that the voices of the individuals who are experiencing the racism comes through in our affinity focus groups? And so Casa Alba Melanie said a strong yes. And so Sister Melanie was the representative from Casa Alba. And Kamsa, our Somali programming group, and Saeed Mohammed said a robust yes, because again, we had a relationship with Kamsa because the Greater Green Bay Foundation 2 years prior had funded a grant supporting women from the Somalian culture and having a first exposure to swimming. And so the Greater Green Bay Community Foundation continues to show up in the sequelae to the big things. And so I would be remiss if I failed to say thank you. And then we had what is his name? AJ from, he wears many hats in the community and came to us from, as a resource officer from the Green Bay Community Police Department or the Safety Center. And he said yes and came in and offered his perspective. The Howe Community Resource Center, you have to feed me the names. Amanda from the Howe Community Resource Center. And then of course, Eddie Moore and Jenny Oliver from the Privilege Institute. And then Bev Scowl and Alice Skinador from Wise Women Gathering Place. All of these people were behind the scenes meeting weekly when they could to inform the information that allowed us to end up with the affinity focus groups. At the onset, we thought that we would do a survey. And you know what? Because people were talking in the community, we found out that Wello was going to do an extensive survey. So instead of using the time and the resources duplicating services, Wello said, sure, we'll add 5 questions that have a focus on this into our survey. And that is just working smarter. And so many of the community partner conversations helped us to recognize what the limitations were of those past studies. Many of the community partner conversations helped us recognize people are not going to come out twice for that. They told us the populations we serve are overtaxed and they need things to be streamlined. And these are the kind of things that they will get passionate about and come and show up for. Those are priceless connections and relationships. So partners, thank you so very much. Next slide. And so the affinity focus groups, research in sociology tells us that the best information comes from the people who are having the experience of it. Or Antonio Gramsci calls it organic intellectuals. And so we believe that the lived experiences, the stories, the anecdotal experiences that kind of came out so profoundly in the affinity focus groups will best inform what we as a community need to do so that all members of our community are safe, they feel like they belong here, they matter in this community, and that people see them. That was a huge takeaway that I think that you guys will see, that people see them, people appreciate their culture, people are willing to accept that they do things different, but different doesn't mean that it's wrong or bad. And so we had Somali participants and we had Hmong, Asian Pacific Islander participants, a spectrum of African American and Black, because all of us are not the same. We had Latino and Hispanic, we had males, we had females, we had GLBT folks represented. We had a very broad and robust catch of individuals that were participating in the affinity focus groups. And we're probably most excited about that. And then, of course, we had our First Nations folks from a few different tribal affiliations. That's fabulous. And so the thick, what research calls thick description and the fabulous research content, we think is going to serve the greater Greener Bay community well. And because they were in affinity focus groups, and that means with people that they felt like could identify with their story, it really makes the sharing easier. And so again, we think we have some of the very best, the thickest, the most reliable information possible to build on in our community. And in our groups, the Somali groups, we had a broad age range. We had ages 20 to 76 years old. And of course, they were male and female. And next. Then we had 28 and 29-year-olds in the Hmong group. And then we had in the African-American, and the folks who identified as Black, biracial, multiracial, multi-ethnic, ages 26 to 46, male and female. We had GLBT representation in that group. Go ahead. I should be looking at that. And then we had 22 to 49-year-olds represented in our Hispanic Latino focus group. Again, multi-ethnic, multiracial, perhaps GLBTQ represented in that group. And then we had our First Nations and Indigenous folks, 21 to 35 years old, people who refer to themselves differently. And I love that we were capturing that and we were calling people by the name that they felt good about, because that's always important to call people by name, right? Okay. And there are a lot of questions that were asked and we modified, and that's what happens in qualitative research. We saw that there were a few gaps or some opportunities, and we added a couple of questions right at the end, and I think they're asterisked at the bottom. But we wanted to hear the personal stories of healthcare experiences, and so those are the questions we asked. We wanted to know if they believed that race was an obstacle to some of their experience, so that's what we asked them. We wanted them to tell us the things that made their faces light up about their families, that made their faces look sad because of experiences with their families. We wanted to know, if you could inform the changes, what would you like to see happen? And we wanted to tell them to tell us about all of the positive things, because what's true is Green Bay is a fantastic place to live for many people. And we wanted to make it a fantastic place for all people to live. When we made the adjustment, We asked about whether people knew about the COVID vaccination and how they felt about it and if they thought that they would be able to get it or not. Because the way that we can get to really just experience our new normal, because it will not be the same as it has always been, but the new normal of our life will be to get herd immunity. We need to get 75 to 85% of our general population vaccinated so that we can stop wearing masks, so we can return to some semblance of our normal. And so our hope is that with a few of the questions that we ask here, it will inform us and we'll be able to educate. We will be able to give people the resources that they need, make sure that they have access in their native language to vaccination sites, and be able to do their part in eliminating the kind of siege we've been under with this pandemic. It's a double. Next. So there are some great outcomes. Like, we know that just the experience is actually quite informative and it's good for us. Like, I like to say, when things don't go quite like I had planned, that it's just information. We secured a ton of information in this process, and that information is going to support the YWCA, it's going to support Prevea Health, it's going to support Brown County Health Department, and all of our partners at caring well and serving better our broad constituency. And so we learned how people perceive things. We learned what they believe about racism. We learned their personal attitudes about racism in Brown County. We were provided valuable information that helps us just to care better for our constituency. And what happened, as usually does in research, is these themes and strengths and weaknesses emerged. They came flying out. We gained all of this insight into the health and well-being of our community members. And so today we'll be reporting out on some of those. I'm going to keep talking for just a second. Andrea, did you say something? No. All right. And so in our report out, we'll be talking about what the themes and strengths that emerged in the affinity groups. We will be talking about the things that people shared in terms of what we can do better. What we know is that there were a lot of hands working behind the scenes. And if I didn't talk about Melissa Laughlin-Holtz, our 2-year intern from the University of Green Bay, Wisconsin. She is in her 2nd year of a 4-year part-time cohort. And the information about that is Partnerships Work. If you ever have an opportunity to have interns come into your space, we highly recommend you giving them the training to be successful and just watching the magic of them work. We know that teamwork makes the dream work. And so when I am done, different people will have pieces of this. Katrina will come from the Brown County Health Department, and she, and give her a round of applause, did the heavy lifting and the data analysis. And in qualitative data, you pull out themes, you crunch you look at the themes, you see like how they're related, and then you present it out, and she'll be doing a fabulous job sharing us what she captured from all the affinity groups. And after that, Andrea Crescent will be sharing a little bit about she will be sharing a little bit about why I think that this particular grant was able to be successfully funded, because it's a part of something bigger than just this grant. And she'll be talking about the community health assessment and talking a little bit about how you can access to it, and then how it's going to be used in our community. And then after that, Melissa will close us out, just wrapping up and giving us some information about how we can get in touch with all of these people. In between my voice and Andrea's, are we going to have, no, after looking at her, Katrina's presentation, she is going to just give us an invitation to do some discussion. And so that discussion, of course, will be done in the chat box, and we'll be watching and asking those questions for you. And then after that, we will have Andrea, and then we will have Melissa. And so I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. It has been a pleasure to be the lead researcher on this event. Of course, you all are probably familiar with me as the former CEO of the YWCA, and that's when I started my work on this grant and have transitioned out to the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Prevea. And I'm so excited to still be connected. It is really a fabulous time to be a part of the YWCA. So if you have an opportunity to hitch your star to the YWCA, I really invite you to get in touch with the folks that work here and are doing a wonderful job making our community a better place to live. So thank you so much. And so I'd like to introduce Katrina to you. Katrina, you're on.
Great, thank you, Renita. Good morning, everybody. My name is Katrina Nordyke, and I'm a public health strategist at Brown County Public Health and have a background in health research. So thank you to Renita, Melissa, Andrea at the YWCA for including Brown County Public Health in this project. It's been our pleasure, and we're very excited about the work that's been done and how the results are going to be integrated into Brown County's Community Health Assessment and Improvement Plan. Also, a big thank you to all the participants for the focus group discussions. They gave us their stories, they opened up in their groups, and this is really all possible because they were willing to share their experiences. So what we did when we were designing the study is we decided that a qualitative research approach would be the best way to capture the lived experiences for those of color in our community. So Renita presented the structure for the focus group discussions. The focus group discussion question guide was developed after those conversations with the community leaders, the grassroots leaders who work with communities of color all the time. They helped discuss what would be important to address and the questions that could elicit some of the rich lived experiences. So based on that question guide, they carried out the focus group discussions. With qualitative research and analysis, the goal is to follow the systematic process in collecting that personal story or personal stories. And then you move from that data, which is their words, their stories, to an interpretation for a more abstract understanding of the underlying meaning of their experiences. And then you aim to present that in a comprehensive way. We chose to use a theme for this study. So Melissa has shared a slide, which is a summary of the study, very briefly just goes through the background, highlights the adults and the different affinity groups that participated. And from the analysis, we created a theme that represents the overall experience that these participants shared with us. And for these participants, ongoing racism negatively impacted their experiences with health structures and systems and their access to both. So our final theme, the negative impacts of racism on relationships, roles, spaces, and resources influence health and well-being sorry, I was reading that, but they create and perpetuate the health inequities for people of color. So just a little summary of how we came to this final theme. We transcribed the focus group discussions, and then we used a qualitative coding software where we looked at their stories and developed initial categories that described what they told us. As part of the qualitative research process, we then took that initial analysis back to the participants. So we invited them to join us for a seminar where we presented our initial findings and asked them if they could recognize themselves in that initial finding. So were we on the right track? Were we representing them correctly? And did they feel that the way that we were representing the focus group discussions captured their experiences. After their feedback, we went back to conduct the final analysis and included the feedback they gave us into that final analysis and crafted the theme, racism negatively impacts experiences with health structures and systems and access to them, that's supported by 2 categories. The categories describing their experiences with relationships, roles, and spaces within the healthcare systems, within their own families, and within their communities. And then also resources. So resources in terms of their relationships and their access, the ability to communicate and to be communicated with respectfully. This presentation that Melissa is sharing includes some of the quotations from the focus group discussions that we highlight as a way to encapsulate what their stories were. So that was the process for analysis and how we came up with the final result, the final theme. And I think that if you have any questions about the specifics of the analysis or the study design, I'm happy to answer those in the discussions that are going to follow. Or if people want to contact me after the seminar, that's also fine. Thank you, Melissa.
Excellent. And so we are just going to shift right into the discussion. And so are there questions in the chat? No. Katrina, you were just sharing some fabulous things that are pretty consistent with qualitative research. And so if we don't have any questions pop up in the chat, would you just mind pulling just a few of those out and sharing them, please?
So there's a question here. What are some interventions that you think may come out of from these results?
Well, I could try to interject and offer the Brown County Public Health perspective a bit. I know Renita discussed some of the larger impacts for the community and for engaging in this type of research focused on racism, and the YWCA does that year-round as part of their mission, as does Brown County Public Health. In terms of interventions that may come out of these results, specifically from this study, in addition to just the general theme about the experiences of racism related to health, we see that it is an issue that needs to be part of the discourse. We do need to discuss racism and racism related to health, which Renita framed nicely in the scope of the social determinants of health. We know that all of these things impact health. So lived spaces, economics, background, gender, those things all come together and culminate in health and well-being and how people experience their well-being. So I think one important thing that comes from this study is just how clear it is that we need to address this. So racism does impact health. It impacts the structures around it, and it impacts people's access to those systems. In addition, the focus group discussions gave us insight into specific interventions that communities of color would like to see. So we did ask specifically, what type of improvements would you like to see? Those points were included in the follow-up and have been reported out by Brown County Public Health to our collaborators and partners and considered when we're moving forward on our interventions. So for example, the participants gave information about how they feel about vaccination, COVID vaccination specifically, which was one of the things that came up during the focus group discussions. The vaccine came on the scene and we knew that there were strong feelings about it. And so we asked these communities of color, have you heard of the vaccine? Will you get it? How do you feel about it? And we had really rich feedback on how they'll feel about the vaccination. And because of that feedback, we were able to integrate health equity in vaccination to Brown County Public Health's vaccination planning. So those specific strategies and that reference was used for our vaccination plans. So that's an example of how the study directed our interventions and our planning.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful example of, because we were connected, how quickly we were able to activate. And I think that was one of the things that I loved most about who was involved in the kind of interactions that we were having. Thank you so much for that. And I do believe the other way that it informs interventions and that kind of thing is it does inform the work that we do. It informs then the type of topics we choose to address at our Stand Against Racism events. It informs the kind of speakers that we bring to our Implicit Bias conference. And it informs just all of the work that is being done in various areas of the community to give the individuals that are saying this is an issue for me and a barrier to my health and well-being, information that'll help them live better. We have another question, and I said the chat room, it's actually in the question and answer section on our broadcast, so I apologize for that, but if you are hoping to ask questions or have some discussion, please put your questions in the question and answer area. So are there any differences in how women of color versus men of color assessed healthcare, or was it similar? Probably a Katrina question.
Okay. Yep, I can address that. So there are absolutely differences in how women of color versus men of color experience health. And they did discuss this in the focus group discussions. So we didn't do a specific separate analysis for females versus males. However, their stories are interwoven in the analysis. So women were obviously more likely to talk about their experiences of health related to having children, preparing to have children. Women of color also discussed their roles as caregivers within their families. So there seem to be different expectations on the women versus the men in terms of roles in their family related to health. That being said, the men also discussed intervening for their family in terms of the healthcare system. Because of the age groups that participated, we also heard stories about people who took care of their parents and navigated the health systems on their behalf, sometimes in terms of interpreting the language, but also in terms of interpreting the culture around the health systems and structures. So specifically complications related to health insurance, explaining the benefits of preventative care, accompanying to appointments and being advocates for their family members. So in terms of the differences between men and women, there were some differences in how they experienced the healthcare systems and the spaces around them, so even the communities in general. That wasn't the focus of the study, so there were also obviously similarities and the experiences were collectively represented in the analysis and the categories and themes. So we captured that as part of the picture.
And I'm not the expert on this, obviously, but my understanding is that typically women will access healthcare at a higher rate than men. There's some trepidation, I guess, of going to the doctor for men. And we know that in Wisconsin, African-American men are the least vaccinated of all people groups. And so that's not all of healthcare, but I think it is pertinent to some of the things that we found that we know are important to health as we're in this pandemic and that kind of thing. And I know that we have some people on the call or that are involved in the webinar that have some special relationships with men group. And so make sure, if you're interested in chiming in, please write any comments that you have and share with us. Okay, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A.
I just want to put a plug in that here at YW, we did just have our Stand Against Racism series for the month of March, really focused on maternal and infant health outcomes with particularly within Black communities. So if that is something that you are really interested in hearing about maternal and infant health outcomes and the racism that really leads to disparities within maternal and infant health outcomes, that is up on our website to be viewed. We had a really fantastic panel this month who discussed that. So that's my shameless plug for the day.
Yeah, and it's perfect. Andrea, you guys are doing such fabulous work in the Stand Against Racism. Would you mind just sharing a few more of the kind of topics that we've had this year and are looking forward to, please?
Yeah, our series this year has really focused on social determinants of health. I don't think that we've actually explicitly said that until maybe right now, that we were really focused on social determinants of health. So we split our time this year kind of every other month. One sort of side of that has really been focused on systemic racism and the different pieces of systems within our communities that are really reinforcing, creating, enabling, maintaining social and racial disparities within populations in our communities. So we looked at housing, we've looked a ton at healthcare access, we looked at a number of different kinds of educational pieces. So it's been really good, that half of it. And then the other half of our series, every other month, has really been focused on COVID-19 and the unique experience of our different communities with COVID-19. So we had a panel of Black community members sharing their stories about their experience with COVID-19. We had a panel of Asian Americans from a variety of different heritages within Asia coming in and speaking about their experience with COVID-19. And then coming up in April, our next one coming up in April is really focused around the Native American, indigenous and tribal experience with COVID-19 and how that is hitting populations really differently. We know that we have some really significant disparities in infection rates, hospitalization rates, and death rates with COVID-19. But we also know that our communities and our different cultural groups within our region and our community have some really interesting and different and fantastic cultural assets for dealing with this pandemic as well. So we also really wanted to make sure that we were highlighting that and not just how our communities of color are being really hurt by this pandemic, but also the ways that our communities were really had some really beautiful responses and some really interesting and beautiful cultural assets that were helping them to move through this time. So really highlighting both sides of that. So it's been a really good series this year. It very much connects in with the work that's being done here around social determinants of health and racism and coming to racism as a public health perspective and how we can really combat that.
And Andrea, We also, the YWCA is also using some very specific strategies in terms of ways to improve communication across people groups and that kind of thing with the intercultural development inventory. Would you like to say just a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the intercultural development inventory is designed to really target one specific kind of interpersonal or individually mediated racism. And that is, how do we really help people understand the cultural differences in which they're communicating and how they may be perpetuating racism without even knowing that that's happening. There are things that you're saying or activities that you're participating in that really have no idea that this is creating or maintaining racism or creating or maintaining privilege within our society. So really looking at those ways that we can help people to better understand the ways that they're communicating with others, the way that they're interacting with others, the way that they are part of systems and part of organizations, and the way that those systems and organizations are maintaining racism and privilege within our communities. So it is definitely a very different approach to anti-racism education. But I think it's been really effective and in our community specifically has been very effective in helping people to understand those kinds of pieces. Here in Wisconsin, and I think most places, we hear a lot of people who say like, I'm not racist. I'm not part of this. Like, I'm not a racist, which is totally like, absolutely. I believe you that that's true. But helping people to really understand those ways that they're participating in racist systems and racist behavior without even knowing, and helping to get your behavior into line with those values and ethics that you really have of not being racist. So it's been a really great project, and we've seen a ton of real progress and work being done in our community around it.
And I think I love the IDI work because it's so disarming. Like, it is so assimilatable. Because people are afraid to talk about race because they're afraid that they're going to be called prejudiced or a racist or that kind of thing. The format and the processual growth that people see when they're engaged in this is really quite beautiful. And so I really give the YWCA like a 10-star rating on the work that it's trying to grow and the direction that it's headed, and what I believe is the contribution that it can make to the interconnectivity of systems and then disarming systemic racism. And we have information about some of that work on our website, and we just invite you all to just visit the YWCA social justice website often to just be informed of all the marvelous things that are happening at the YWCA. So thank you. What other things? Do we have any more questions come in? Oh, there's one right there. Come on. It's not. Oh, what is the one thing that schools can do right now to head in a more equitable direction? Andrea, do you want to? I certainly have an opinion. Would you like to say anything about it?
Sorry, I have new kiddos that moved in next door that really love to ring my doorbell when they pass past it. So if you hear my doorbell, that would be why.
That would be you developing character on Saturday.
I'm getting ding dong ditched on a pretty regular basis these days. So I think in terms of schools, there's a couple of really great opportunities. One is really for educators to participate in this kind of intercultural development work, of being able to do some real soul searching of where is it that I am participating in systems and building and maintaining structures within my classroom that are really giving benefits to some of my students and not others. And I think that that really is, for the vast majority of us, a very unintentional process. It's not something that we intend to do by any means, but it's part of the way that our structures work. So being really mindful of how that's happening and being able to address that when it is happening, I think is a huge part of this in terms of schools.
You took the question now?
Oh, did somebody ask him?
Sorry.
So really being able to identify those kinds of pieces, working together, particularly when we're talking about equity in schools, working together with our families of color and making sure that we're really listening to what they're saying, and being able to validate their experience and take it as true. That's very much something that came through in our most recent webinar about maternal and infant health outcomes, was about like listening to people when people are coming in and saying, this is a problem, to be able to really listen to them. We used the example of Serena Williams, which is such a powerful statement about health equity. Of Serena Williams had her child. She's an incredibly educated and powerful woman with, endless resources. When she had her second child, she knew that something was wrong, and she asked repeatedly for help. And she wasn't getting the kind of help that she was asking for. There's a ton of research out there that particularly Black women, particularly other women of color, are really dismissed in their concerns instead of being listened to. There's a ton of research out there, some of my favorite research, that white people, we cannot see pain on people of color's faces. Like, we can't interpret their facial expressions. So being able to really listen to people, and centering those conversations around what is it that our families of color are really asking for and really need, what is it that they're saying is not working for them, and then being able to work together to try and find some solutions so that everyone's really included in that process of co-creating new systems where people are a part of that, and that it's really working for everyone. The other thing that I really want to make sure that I mention is that no one is trying to build systems that don't work for white people. Like, that's not the goal. We're not trying to kick anybody out. We're just really trying to create systems that work better for our families of color, both in healthcare and education, and also work better for our white families as well. And that really, by creating equity and by creating systems that work better for people, we create systems that work better for everybody in that process.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you so much for that. And I wanted to add one other thing. If there was one thing that I think that would be a game changer and we would see very quick changes with, is if we have more teachers of color. Right now, the greater Green Bay public school system is really lopsided in terms of white middle-class teachers. We have seasoned professionals and that kind of thing, but the broadest teacher demographic in Green Bay public schools is white women. And so if we can start to have white women, white men, Black women, Asian men, if we could start to really expand the diversity in the teaching cohort, that would make a difference right away. Yeah, so other things. Do we have any more chats?
Yeah, I don't have any specific data about diversifying cores of teachers, but I do know that there's been quite a bit of data coming out recently about how Black moms and babies do substantially better when they have a doctor of color, particularly a Black doctor that is working with them. And those health disparities within infant and maternal mortality and morbidity rates are improved incredibly, really shockingly, when Black moms and babies are taken care of by Black doctors. So my guess would be that there would be some correlation there as well with Black teachers and other teachers of color as well. So I do think that diversifying our professional pools is a really important piece of this as well.
There is information about the current demographics that the Green Bay Public Schools is operating as. There is a website for Green Bay Public Schools information. Melissa, would you mind, can you remind me, and I will try to fish that up, and then we will get that available. We will make that available to, we'll just kind of send out an email so that you all know, but there is information available about the diversity or the demographics of the teaching staff. I actually, it's so funny, for another thing, I got the whole list of teachers and I hand counted how many white teachers, of all of the different races. That was this summer, so I certainly don't remember it, but I do just have the sense that it was really, really lopsided in terms of white teachers at the top. And I will try to get that, Vicki, to you. And so thank you so much for your questions. It's almost survey. Okay, do we have any new ones? No more open ones. Jasmine Gordon is going to answer live. Something popped up?
No, I just moved it over.
Oh, sorry. Just stuff popping up on our little screens back here. Any other questions, any other comments, anything that anybody is really interested in discussing during this time? No? Okay, well, thank you all so much for your time during this discussion. We will shift to Andrea Crescent, and it looks like we're on track to give you a little bit more of your beautiful Saturday morning. Andrea.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for an engaging and robust conversation around these incredibly important topics that public health is really trying to weave into our future strategies. And this information is just so valuable for us as we look at what those priorities are for health in our community. So one of the key things that we do every 3 years is we do a really robust assessment of the health of our community. And so we're going to share with you all some information about how you can access all of this information. But thanks, Melissa, for showing on the screen right now a 2-page summary of the assessment process that we go through, and then the community health improvement plan that we develop. So in the past, you'll have seen some of those health priorities around mental health, alcohol, drug use and abuse, and nutrition, physical activity. But as referenced earlier in this presentation, we now know that it's of critical importance that we look at why those health gaps exist and why there might be inequities. And so, as mentioned before, we're grounding this assessment in those social determinants of health. So calling out income, housing, education, healthcare, neighborhoods, all of those things that we've been talking about as critically important pieces of the conversation. In addition, for framing for this entire assessment and improvement plan is recognizing what we've been talking about this morning together, that certain groups in our community are affected differently, whether that's in terms of roles, responsibility, or resources. We really need to look at why those things are happening. So Melissa, if you want to just scroll up to the bottom half of the page for me, please. So what we've done is we have pulled together a really large document. It's like 60 pages long. So it has some really great data for all of you to review. But the 3 new priorities that we're proposing, could you go back up to the first page, please? So the 3 new priorities that we're proposing are equitable access, we're looking at social cohesion, and we're looking at unified policy and planning efforts. So there is right now on the screen a QR code. If you wanted to pull out your phone, take a picture of that code right there. That will bring you to a website where you can find this document. It will find the full 60-page document that has a robust assessment of the health of our community for those of you who are feeling daring. And then also there's a survey. So this 2-page summary we do have available, and the survey as well in Spanish, Hmong, and English. So feel free to review this information. Let us know what you think. We're definitely interested in hearing from you, and hearing if you think that this truly reflects what those health priorities are for our community. And then Melissa, if you just wouldn't mind showing the second page quickly. I won't go into all of the details right now in terms of some of the proposed steps that we might be able to take as a community, but I just wanted to share that there are three priorities that we've done an overview of. We have laid out some potential suggestions for what our community might be able to do. Andrea, actually, it's nice to hear you talk about, and Renita as well, representation, healthcare providers of color, talking about schools and that engagement piece, looking at building up community, neighborhood connections, safe spaces, and representation. So a lot of those same things that we've learned in part from this project, in part from other work that we've been doing, we've tried to weave into this community health assessment and community health improvement plan for the next 3 years. So with that in mind, please visit that website. Let us know what you think, if we're on track or if we're missing the mark in any way. We would love your feedback, and I'll hand it back over to you, Melissa. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Andrea. So we're gonna pop into my all right, so some context here. Just wanted to let you know that the recording for today's session and later sessions held, which will be held in Hmong, Somali, and Spanish, will be posted on the YWCA website under the Social Justice Educational Programs page. So it's www.ywcagreenbay.org/what/we're-doing. I'm sorry, what/we're/eliminating/racism/empowering/social-justice-programs/. And so here are the contacts, the contacts for today. If you have any questions. And again, we want to thank you for joining us and discussing racism and its impacts on health. Have a great day. Sorry if I was also going too fast with reading that website. You can also go to the YWC website and under the social justice tabs, that would be where you could also find the videos.